Hi, everyone. Welcome to Soul Stories with Kate Mazaris. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so I thought I would share a story of a wonderful woman that I had the blessing to interview back in 2014 for a novel that I wrote the next year called The Lacemakers. Emily is not her real name. I want to protect her identity, but I did want to share her story because it is so haunting. I was lucky enough to be connected with Emily through a woman at the Jewish Community Center. And I met her at a retirement home briefly just to be introduced to her. And then we set up a couple of interview times in the future, one in which her friend was with her. And the second time, her friend was with her at the beginning and then she left. And the story that I'm going to share was revealed to me after her friend had left, because I don't think that Emily had ever shared this part of her journey as a concentration camp victim and survivor. She was initially taken to Auschwitz when she was a teenager, and surviving that experience was unbelievably difficult. It was hard for her to talk about the conditions there. She mentioned the guards, they were called capos, and they were often other prisoners that had risen in power because of their allegiance to the Nazis. And they were often more cruel than the Nazi guards themselves. And I asked her about women in these camps because during my research period, it was very difficult to find stories about female survivors, tons of stories about male survivors, but it was difficult to learn, like, what happened to these women who were carted off the boxcars and who were not selected for execution, but for the camps. I know many of them were menstruating, many of them were pregnant, many of them had other female gynecological issues that they were dealing with, pain and suffering, miscarriages, that kind of thing. And you never hear about that. I had to dig for about 2 months until I found some obscure report that was done by some college study about, women in camps and what happened to them before they were starved nearly to death. So I asked Emily about this, and she started crying. And she told me a story about a woman who was pregnant, and they concealed her pregnancy as best as they could. But of course, when the baby was born, they couldn't conceal that. And one of the capos demanded that she and another prisoner um, take the baby and make sure it didn't return. And she described in detail what she was ordered to do, and she started sobbing. And she said to me, Um, I feel like that is why I wasn't allowed to have babies in this lifetime once I got liberated. She just started crying. She felt such guilt and shame. And I said to her at the time, um, you were beaten mercilessly by those guards. You were beaten in your abdomen and your low back, and it scarred you for life. And that's why you weren't able to have children. What you did was to survive. And so that mother could survive. And she did survive. The mother survived. She survived. They were liberated eventually, of course. And then she immigrated to the United States. Uh, at which point she married a wonderful man who she talked about, showed me pictures of him. It was just a wonderful marriage that they had. They ended up moving to Toledo. And she volunteered with children in schools in her synagogue. Her whole life, she worked with children. And I think part of that was her wanting to atone for the loss of that baby. I'll never forget the sound of her tears, and I have that recording saved. It's very difficult for me to listen to because of the raw emotion that she was experiencing. And the reason I'm sharing this story today is because the people who survived the Holocaust are leaving us. They're dying every single day. Or they were too young to remember specific things. Um, During my research, I was able to watch a lot of videos on the Shoah Foundation's website, which I will put in the description of this video. And if you're interested in learning more about the stories of these survivors and the people who liberated the camps. You might be very interested in viewing those videos. One of the things I found the most fascinating was that, we always hear that there were 6 million Jews executed, and they were the number one group of people that were annihilated. It was genocide, absolutely. But I found a website called 5 Million Forgotten, which I will also include in the description of this video, that told the stories of 5 million other people that were executed mercilessly because they hid Jews in their homes because of political because they didn't believe, they didn't prescribe to the Nazi regime, because they were homosexual, mentally ill, physically disabled. These people were also rounded up and mercilessly executed as well. So minimum, there were 11 million people executed during the Holocaust. And every one of those stories deserves to be told. I think that, our country and our culture has a long history but a short memory, and we forget the events that happened that led to World War II and the scars that remain in our culture even now. And the sad ending to Emilie's story is that every time I would meet with her, she would tell me more and more and things that she had never shared with anyone. And a lot of what she shared with me, I put in the Lacemakers because I wanted it to be fact-based, not emotionally charged with what I thought had happened. Everything that's in that book is accurate. It only takes place on one day in a concentration camp, but everything is accurate right down to the moon phase. At night, I looked that up. What was the moon phase? In April of that year, before Bergen-Belsen was liberated. And maybe I want to say 2 or 3 years after I had met Emilie, I had a dream about her. And we were sitting at a bench at a train station, and she told me that she was getting ready to leave. And she wanted to thank me for allowing her to tell her story. And a few days later, I went to the library and I was talking to a mutual friend of Emilie's, and she told me that she had passed away that week, that she had actually committed suicide, overdosed on pills because the anguish of her life became too great. So even at the end of her life, she carried the Holocaust with her. I think that unless we learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to learn more about the Holocaust, what created it, the atrocities that happened, and how the world healed after it. Because I'm afraid we are doomed to repeat it in the current culture. I'm also going to include a link to a blog that I wrote called Stone of Sorrow that relates to a pebble that someone brought me from Auschwitz, and just a story that came from remembering and revisiting those stories during my research. So as we are aware of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I encourage all of you to learn something about what happened then and to create a space within yourself so that this can never, ever happen again. Thank you for listening. And until I see you next time, I wish you peace.